Welcome to the Assistant Lab podcast, hosted by Victoria Ratton and Arnell Martin.
This podcast is dedicated to the executive assistant profession, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
We've created this podcast for the outliers, the linchpins, the assistants who are serious about their careers. This is a podcast for those who are preparing for the future today.
This is a space for no-nonsense content, benchmarking and tracking industry and world trends, as well as interesting interviews with exceptionally inspirational people. The goal here is to stimulate new ways of thinking and being in this profession.
So, on with the show.
Welcome to this next episode of the Assistant Lab. We're super excited to welcome the amazing and fabulous Julie Perrine, the CEO and founder of allthingsadmin.com. Julie has developed what is a one-stop shop and portal for assistants worldwide on processes and systems and everything you need to do these roles really successfully. She's also an accomplished author, and her books have been read by assistants and support professionals all over the world. Of course, we take Julie back through her career journey, starting life on the farm, and how she became an assistant in the first place, and then making that transition to virtual assistant, and then fully fledged training company and business owner. Julie talks a lot in this episode about why it is so important for assistants to have a strategic career plan, where we can actually really take this role. We talk a lot about the controversy currently around the chief of staff role, because there are differing opinions about this from leaders around the world. And we also talk about the learning and development for assistants. A lot of assistants tell Anel and I, and Julie as well, that there's a saturation of training programs, virtually and in person, saturation of professional development for assistants, not just in the countries we're in, but again, worldwide. Julie really gives some great advice about how you can strategically plan your learning and development, cut through that noise, and ultimately cut some of these emails from your inboxes. And it also we also go into kind of working out what your learning style is and the resources that you actually need personally, so not your peer group but you, to successfully be in these roles. This is an amazing episode. We don't hold back. We never do in the Assistant Lab, so enjoy. Wow, super excited about this. Welcome to the Assistant Lab, Julie. We're so happy to have you with us today. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you for the invite.
And I was just trying to think earlier, like when the three of us were last in the same room together, because that has happened before, but I think it was probably coming up for about 10.
Johannesburg.
Was it
I wasn't in Johannesburg, so no, I think it may have been London in 2013.
Yeah, and
that would have been it.
10 years ago.
Wow. That's crazy.
Haven't we all aged wonderfully? With the COVID pandemic in the middle of it all, and now cost of living crisis. But no, thank you ever so much for coming on. And we've been wanting to get you on for a little while now, and I know all of our listeners around the world will get so much out of this. So I'll let Anel start our conversation off.
Fantastic. So, on this podcast, we always like to ask a little bit about your journey. Where did it all start? Take us back to the beginning and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I was born and raised on a farm, so my first jobs were actually farm jobs. So when I got my first office job, I thought I had arrived. It was so fantastic to not be doing farm labor of some sort, being a farmer's daughter with no brothers. So the very first office position I had was like a front desk receptionist position for a campground while I was in college. It was the summer between my freshman and sophomore year. So made all of $4 per hour and was delighted to make it. And then after my husband and I finished college and got married, my very first post-college position was actually as the assistant manager at a national craft and fabric store chain. So I was the craft department coordinator, and I had always I love sewing, I love crafts. So that position was a good fit for me until I got to work one morning and somebody had been shot in the parking lot the night before. And the bullet hole and the remnants of the incident were still very clearly visible on the wall of the building that I parked next to. And that kind of took care of that position for me. So I moved into my first like front desk receptionist position working for a church corporate headquarters in California where we lived at the time. And that position was a really good introductory position into public speaking per se, because one of my responsibilities was giving tours of our corporate facilities and our 33-acre award-winning campus. So that I got to do a lot of interacting with people and a lot of like just mini little groups, but tours of the facility and of the grounds on a weekly basis. So that was kind of my first. I wasn't comfortable with public speaking by any means, but that was kind of like my first step into that. And then kind of had a couple other positions there. And then my husband and I moved back from California to Iowa in the summer of 1995, I think it was. And we had planned to start a family, but life took some detours and my husband had some health setbacks, which also led to some financial setbacks. And so I ended up working 3 jobs simultaneously. First as a police 911 dispatcher. I say today, that's why my nerves are still frazzled. I worked in the front desk or at the front office of a foam manufacturing plant. We built and cut custom foam cushions for furniture. And then I also had another part-time job working at a pharmaceutical shipping company as a staffer and an order processor. So I didn't know if I was coming or going most of the time, but that was kind of that interim period of trying to figure out what do I want to be when I grow up. And at this point, really didn't have a lot of, when I got out of college and got married, my goal was to become a mother and a homemaker like my mom had been, but I knew I would have to work in the meantime. So I didn't really have a career path in mind. And I didn't really even understand what a career was, or that I should even be pursuing one outside of motherhood and homemaker. And I was completely fine with pursuing that. But life takes you other directions. And so my husband ended up getting a job for a global insurance company right before Y2K, if we remember that time in history. And I eventually ended up getting a job as an administrative assistant at that company, also supporting 3 of their executives there in one of their financial markets areas. And that was really where I was able to kind of grow and evolve my role in the meaningful way. And it went more of a marketing project management direction. And I loved it, loved everything about it. But it was getting to the point where I had done some homework, done my research, and they did not want to pay me even entry-level project management money. I was still making administrative assistant money for a project management role that I had kind of evolved the job into. And so after doing all my homework and presenting things to HR and presenting things to my manager and thinking I had people on board, and then they still decided that wasn't the route they wanted to go, I decided that was not the route I needed to continue on either. And so when I left, they hired 2 people to replace me. So that was one of those moments of like a little bit of self-validation, but also so frustrating. You just want to spit nails when you're done. But at this point, my husband and I again thought we'd maybe shift towards me becoming more of a home, full-time working professional of some sort. And so that was when I started selling Tupperware. Well, actually, I had started selling Tupperware previous, but I had not really taken it as a full-time role. And so I got into Tupperware more full-time and was doing parties and was a manager, had a team I was building around me. Was very successful doing so. I even ended up with a Tupperware provided vehicle at that point. And then as things happen with economies and shifts in markets, Tupperware changed their compensation program and changed their car program. And what I had been doing wasn't enough to maintain all of those things. And about that same time, as fate would have it, a recruiter had reached out to me about a position supporting the president of a national telecommunications company. And I was so taken aback by this phone call because I wasn't looking for a job. I hadn't told anybody I was even considering some additional changes due to the Tupperware shift. And I didn't have a resume current because I'd left corporate America a couple of years earlier and I was thinking I was done with corporate America. And the recruiter says to me, well, can you have it updated by the end of the weekend? And I was like, sure. So so got to work on it, got a resume to her, got my work samples that I had together, reorganized. And 2 weeks later, I had interviewed twice. They made me an offer and I landed in the C-suite supporting the company president of this telecommunications company. And that position was probably the most prestigious position from an executive support position that I'd had up to that point. Found myself working for the best executive that I had ever worked for, like just such a fit personality type wise, with work styles, with communication styles. It just couldn't be better.
It's literally what every assistant dreams of. And it happens to most assistants, but then you get a part of our population who never get to experience that.
But it was in the most toxic work environment you can imagine. So the company was going through bankruptcy and there were issues with like workplace bullying, and the day-to-day environment was horrible. So when my executive decided to retire I knew at the 9-month mark that he was making a plan to do something, but we were a publicly traded company and he couldn't say anything to me because that would cause a snag with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And I didn't want to ask him because I didn't want to put him in that position. But as an assistant, you're reading their emails, you know what's happening, you see the behind the scenes. And so I knew something was coming. And so I went into his office and I said to him one day, closed the door, and I said, I realize that there are some things shifting here. And I just want to share with you that if the opportunity to work for you outside of this environment ever exists, I would welcome that opportunity. I said, because if you leave here for any reason at some point in the future, I'm not going to stay. And I said, I'm either going to work for you or I'm going to work for myself. But at that point, I had made the decision that I was going to make a change of some sort. And so I credit that position and that experience as being one of the most pivotal points in my career, because it's truly when I shifted from a reactive approach and waiting for things to happen to me taking control, creating my game plan, creating my career plan, and actually putting a plan of attack in place for what my transition was going to be. And it was at that same point, that 9-month mark, where my husband and I started what we called the JTF, and it was the Julie Transition Fund. And we started socking as much money away as we possibly could so that I'd have a good 6-month cushion if I needed it for getting my whatever business venture I was going for. And at that point, I was just thinking of virtual assistants, to get that up and running. And so that kind of became the start of my idea for launching out on my own in January of 2005, then, after my executive did officially retire from that company.
I mean, that's a really, really fascinating journey, Julie. And what struck me is about you saying how you took ownership and then realizing you had to be proactive rather than reactive. And it just strikes me today, because I think Anel and I can really resonate with that from our career stories. But today, it does seem, and I've said this in the EPA Facebook group just recently, and it may have come across a bit harsh to some of our members, but a lot of assistants seem to be sitting there waiting for this magic to happen, that some perfect dream boss is going to come along, click their fingers and create this dream career they want. And I've never had that mindset. I've had some great bosses and awful bosses, but I never expected any of them to make these things happen. I knew it was on me, but it does seem like we have gone a little bit back into reactive mode with some assistants of late, and I don't know whether that's COVID and just being ground down and exhausted and just trying to find their way up again. I'm not sure.
I think that is certainly an aspect of it, but I also think it's when you aren't sure. I mean, there's a lot of things changing in our environment, financially, technologically, and for a lot of us personally, the last 3 years have changed a lot of us at our core. And so resetting and figuring out where you want to go now with some of those factors in play. And that's why I'm such a huge advocate of a strategic administrative career plan. You can course correct much more effectively and efficiently, even if it's a completely different path than you thought you wanted to be on 3 years ago or 5 years ago. But having at least something mapped out that gives you something to make practical and intelligent decisions about on paper, instead of just letting those things roll around in your head and get more and more confused. And then that, I think, sometimes does shift us back into reactive instead of proactive, because we get stuck in our own heads.
Yeah. No, and you make a very good point. I think also, if you are putting that plan on paper, you are automatically reducing the anxiety, the confusion. I think, you know, there is in neuroscience, they talk about the correlation between, you know, physically putting pen to paper. It is actually, you are physically taking the first step, as opposed to just being stuck in your head on it.
Well, and that ties in, you know, I'm big on procedures and systems development as well. And they talk about when you take a procedure out of your head and put it on paper, you also make it more efficient, because then you start to see where there are things where you're repeating yourself, or it's not as efficient as it could be, or you can see the bottlenecks more clearly. And so that's why journaling is such a huge piece of anything you do for yourself, like from a self-care and a career planning perspective. Just getting the thoughts on paper helps you organize them and structure them much more proactively and efficiently than just, again, letting them spin on a spin cycle inside your head.
And it was funny because I said to the EPA members last week, I'm on this big like health and fitness journey at the moment, and I was saying like I'm rubbish at journaling, and I thought because of my background professionally I'd be really good at it, but I've tried a couple of times. But I guess I've got my own version of it, because I've got my notepads and I've got my whiteboard, and I mind map a lot, and I've sometimes have like lots of what it drives my board of directors up the wall sometimes, but it all comes out of my head and I know it's making sense, but only when you put it down on paper. Then
well, and I'll tell you, it's an art form. So most people, and the reason why I struggled with it at first was because I thought it had to be a prescriptive way I did it. Like you had to use one book and a certain time of day and a certain type of journaling. I have more journals started for different purposes than you can probably count. It probably ties into why my ADHD brain, but I have the whiteboard here. I have, you know, journals. I use my, my goal planning notebook for the goal pieces of it. I mean, you've got to make it your own art form and not get too stuck in one person said, do it like this. And, you know, gratitude journal, 5 things. Like the structure doesn't work for everybody. So do what works for you. If you're tech focused, use something with technology. If you're paper focused, use paper. Me, I need a hybrid of both. So it's like, find what works for you, but it is a really valuable tool in helping you process productively what's going on up here so that you can make sense of it and turn it into a plan of action to take action on then.
Definitely. I love that. So you went to you became a businesswoman and set up All Things Admin, which Anel and I absolutely love. And I'll have to be honest with you, when we came on the market as trainers, I remember saying to Anel, we don't have to do any of training on that. Julie has just got that all tied up. So we're always referring people to your website because we could train on it, but we know we wouldn't do it as good as you. So it is literally like a treasure trove of lots of fabulous resources and toolkits. I mean, literally every process conceivable to a support professional, admin professional, it's there on your website. So how did that all come about? So you said that you and hubby were starting to put that pot of money aside for you setting up. Was the initial idea to be a virtual assistant, and then All Things Admin came?
Yeah, so in January of 2005, that was when I left my corporate position. And I immediately, even though I wasn't totally ready, I'm like, I didn't want a gap on my resume. So I officially hung out my shingle for Julie Perrine Virtual Assistant. And the first thing I did was get my Certified Administrative Professional credential through the International Association of Administrative Professionals. So I spent that first 3 months, January, February, and March, studying for that exam, which was, I think, like the first week of April or something like that, or end of April. So I got that certification first because I just felt like I wanted a little something to set me apart. And back in 2005, there were less than 4,000 virtual assistants worldwide. Like it was still a very small, very niched area. And so people were not even sure what a virtual assistant was, let alone, you know, what they could do for them. And so I was looking for a way to set myself apart from the others that I had done some research on and come across to that point. And I just thought, well, a certification can give me just another edge. And so that was the first thing I did, was get that taken care of. And then it was April of 2005, the local newspaper ran a story on my business, and it was related to Administrative Professionals Week, and so they were looking for a story. So they called our local IAAP chapter and said, is there anybody interesting we could interview? And with the gal they had called was like, oh, well, this gal in our chapter just started a virtual assistant business. That might be kind of interesting. So I ended up with this feature story in the local paper that started driving traffic to my website, which wasn't even fully ready yet, and business leads to me. And most of my initial business leads came from that article, and they were past colleagues I had worked with or past employers I had worked for who knew what I could bring to the table as an administrative assistant, and were like, oh, you're doing this? Like, we just launched a business. So 2005, this was before the recession of 2008, 2009. So there wasn't as much like, people were always concerned during the recession, like, is this hurting your business? And I'm like, actually, during these moments in history, more people are starting businesses. And so my business was booming during that time. So, but that hadn't quite arrived yet in 2005. So, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to find clients. I was just like, okay, well, let me get some of these other things in place, get my business structure set up. Well, as I got going then with some of these clients and helping them with their businesses, most of them didn't need permanent full-time support. So it was a great fit. And so I was having a blast supporting some past colleagues I had worked for, getting introduced to some new ones. But eventually, a lot of them were growing to the point where they actually did need somebody more permanently. And I didn't want to be that person. Like, once I got that taste of independence and working for myself, I was like, oh, yeah, if I can do it for you virtually, great. But if you want somebody at your office, or you want somebody that's like a permanent part-time or permanent full-time, that's not me anymore. So I was helping train their new team members and getting them, I'm hardwired for procedures. So every client had their own set of procedures that I developed for them as we were getting them up and going. And so then I would take those procedures and train their new team members. And so that was kind of how I got started with the training side of admins, and started to realize, as I was helping a couple of my clients get some of their training programs and some of their books published, I'm like, you know what, if I'm not clocking billable hours, I'm not making money. And I'm like, how do I get the institutional knowledge up here into a format that I can be making money with ongoing without it having to require me being there actively doing something all the time? So that was when I kind of started making that shift towards, I loved doing admin work, but I loved training admins just as much, if not more. And so that was why that was the idea, or the seed, for launching All Things Admin then in the summer of 2009. So about 4 years later, that was when that came to fruition.
It's fascinating. You said there were about 4,000, going back to that little bit, 4,000 virtual assistants like worldwide. And like, look how big the virtual assistant industry is now. I mean, it's absolutely huge. And
yes,
really, I mean, you were one of the pioneers for it, if you think about it, looking at how it's structured now. Because when I don't know about South African America, but typically in the UK, if an assistant's made redundant from a big corporate, or typically the larger organizations which restructure every 5 minutes here, that's normally you get the corporate PAs thinking, actually, have I done my time in corporate UK, and is it time to go off on my own? And that's the first thing they do tend to investigate. Some of them get scared, and then they'll run for the hills and back to another corporate. But some really successful VAs have come out of big corporations.
So the most interesting thing, I think, that you saying that, and what causes some people to go running back to corporates, is people fail to understand that becoming a virtual assistant isn't just doing admin work like you did working corporately. You are running a business. So you are the CEO. You are not just managing someone else's admin work. You're managing your own admin work, your sales, your marketing, your website development, your finance, and in some of these cases, if you don't have the expertise, you need to hire legal, you need to hire finance, you need to hire the marketing, or hire the web designer. And it becomes overwhelming very quickly. So one of the things that I tell anyone who is potentially considering becoming a virtual assistant is make sure you're very clear on all of the components that make a business run well, and that you've done your homework and you've done your research into those aspects before you make the leap, because you'll be much more successful making that step into self-employment if you are more fully prepared of what that role is. And it's not, the doing work for your clients is a really small segment of that when you're first getting it up and going, especially.
And now I'm just curious, like, how big's the virtual assistant industry? I mean, is it a big thing in SA? I've never even asked you about that.
Quite established. I mean, I wouldn't say we've got millions, but it is a smaller, pool that you're fishing in. But I think a lot of people are quite hesitant to take on still, traditionally your bigger companies, your high net worth individuals will have private offices, so they tend to employ virtual assistants. So yes, I would say it's still in the founding stages, not massively established.
It's definitely an interesting one. I know for a lot of PAs making the transition, though, the big thing in the UK is they're absolutely petrified about selling themselves, because then you've got to market you, and you've got to market the services, and you've got to go out to different networking events that are not all full of assistants that you might be used to. And then there's a lot over here that's always made about, well, you've got to niche. And actually, one of the most successful VAs I know here recently said, I'm tired of hearing about the niching. Like, it works for some, but it doesn't work. You shouldn't kind of give that as the one journey size fits all to every virtual assistant.
If you aren't entirely clear what you want to be doing, you need to be more of a generalist when you first start. But the more clients you work with, and the more projects you work on, and the more personalities you engage with, you get more clear more quickly. Let me just say that about what your niche may be. And as my business coach is currently saying about some things I'm doing with my own business, she's like, choose your niche for now. And you can change it whenever you need to or decide to, because to pick one and think you're going to be married to it the rest of your life is not a wise move anyway in the current business environment that we're all dealing with. And all it takes is, one technology to come along and potentially put you out of business if you stake your claim to one particular area of, supporting somebody virtually, and then a tool or a technology comes along that can do it more efficiently than you can. You've got to be able to pivot and shift very quickly and know what else you can do instead.
And Julie, what you said about, working with different people, I think sometimes your niche finds you, just by what you enjoy, and through finding that first one, you get introduced to another person. So I'm finding this in the social media management that I'm doing, that I have now created a niche just by the interactions I'm having and the kind of work I enjoy. So, but I do think, like you said, just having that ability to pivot when necessary, and not being so married to what you've got going on now that you can't see that it's time to make that change.
Right. I agree.
Well, now, while we're on the subject of changes and, big shakeup, with the COVID period, can't really say in the rearview mirror, but sort of tapping off, a lot's being made of the chief of staff position, so I want to find out from you, firstly, what are your opinions on the role itself? And we see quite a lot of people who are not coming from an assistant background stepping into these positions. Tell us where you land on this, because I know it's quite a big thing in the States. Vic, I don't know how big it is in the UK.
It's not massive, and that's the issue I've got with it. It's being made a massive issue in the UK. My worry is, okay, so if a UK assistant now has hit the C-suite, they've hit the top of their game, they've had an excellent assistant career, and they're now being told by this industry in the UK that the next step for them is the chief of staff role. Okay, right, we'll go on the job sites, and there'll be probably less than 3 chief of staff roles advertised across 64 million people in the UK, whatever our population is now. And so what happens to that EA that's hit the lid, done their time? And so what, they're going to sit there and wait and fight it out with the now tens of thousands of assistants who are in the exact same spot trying to go for that position. And I met an American chap called Matt, and he came to work for Barclays Bank in the UK. And he had a big background, not from an assistant background at all. I mean, in fact, people can look him up. Matt is now the CEO of Barclays UK. But when I met him, he was the chief of staff to John Varley, who was the group CEO, global CEO of Barclays. And John, I worked very closely with John and his office because he was the president of the charity I supported the CEO at. And it was really, really clear, Julie, like the definition between Matt as chief of staff to Claire, the executive assistant, to Linda, the personal assistant, and then there was an admin there as well. And their roles were really, really clearly defined. I completely got it and who I was supposed to be working with at any one time. And that was over 20 years ago. That was like the start of my big roles. And now Matt's obviously a massive figure in British banking and he's done really, really well. But I shared his biography in the EPA Facebook group the other day, and I said, this chap doesn't come from an assistant background. Not all chief of staffs are from assistant backgrounds, and that's what's being sold in our industry at the moment. So I guess in a long-winded way, Julie, I'm saying that's the British perspective. I just worry, are we over-egging it and setting up some assistants for disappointment if the roles aren't there?
Okay, so I think it depends. It depends on how the role is being defined. It depends on how the organization is looking at it and what they're expecting someone to be able to do in it. And so, like I was saying, the admin role and our job titles and the things that have been so diverse within this particular role, I think the same applies for that chief of staff role. So I think it's going to depend. So this administrative assistant I was working with, who was supporting a CEO of a smaller construction company, she was the executive assistant. That was her title at this company. She had come from a national insurance company and her role there was like senior administrative assistant, but probably felt like it was an equivalent type role. And I could see where she would think that. She comes into this role as an executive assistant to the CEO at this construction company. And she calls me and she's like, I am in over my head. She's like, what he is expecting me to do, what he needs me to do. I don't feel like I have the first clue about how to do what I'm supposed to do. And I mean, I was a senior administrative assistant over here. Well, I had worked at that company previously also. And in my head, I was like, yeah, they're calling it that, but what you were doing was more basic admin role. And so that is the first problem, is we don't have clear definition of what the role is within the current profession, let alone stepping into a chief of staff role within your current company or another. So I think it also depends then too on educational background, because there are some administrative professionals who have master's degrees. They are much more suited for some of those higher level roles in Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies than someone who has no advanced degrees or that extra management training or that extra communications training. And I'm not saying you have to have those things, but I'm saying that background and the educational piece of that is a factor that can help you be more prepared for stepping into a higher level role like that. And so you guys have been friends of mine for a long time and have followed what I'm doing. I happen to believe that the administrative professional role is one of the absolute best preparatory roles within a company for preparing you for whatever you want to do next. And so if the title of chief of staff is truly what someone wants to and wants to be and wants to aspire to, back to that career plan thing again, you need to put some specific plans in place for making sure that you've got the management training, the communications training, the public speaking training, the things that are going to make you successful doing a higher level management role. And if you're not currently managing people in your admin role and you think you're going to step into a chief of staff role, I think you have a little bit of a shock coming. You need to have some skills and some things built up to be prepared for that. And so a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the 3 Ps, people, processes, and projects. And so making sure you really know what your plan of attack is for all of those areas and being comfortable stepping into that before you apply for a position like that. And then, you know, really find yourself in a spot that you're not set up for succeeding at from the beginning.
Well, I have to tell you, Julie, the only time in my life I ever came across a chief of staff in South Africa was actually for our CEO's office. Sadly, he wasn't from an administrative background, and the CEO quickly figured out he didn't need the man. So, you know, I think also it cuts both ways. I think sometimes if you look at some of the tendrils that go into what we do, and that project management portion. I think it can work the other way as well, that sometimes they just don't succeed because they don't have that deep domain knowledge. They don't know who to talk to. So I think there we saw the opposite being true, where they actually realized we just pay our top PA a little bit more money, and she's actually already doing this. So I think that to me was just the opposite side of the coin when you do bring somebody in without that background.
Well, and I think the other thing, and you'll hear me talk a bit about this and everything, is understanding your personality type, your work style, your communication style, your strengths, and being very clear about who you are and the value that you add and the strengths that you bring to the table. And then your skills layer on top of that. And then your experience layers on top of that. And so it's not that an administrative professional can't step into that role. They absolutely can. They are. And in some organizations, they're doing it very successfully and not surprising to me at all.
Yeah.
But where I think the biggest gap exists here is, so I say this all the time about the admin role. A lot of people think as long as you can, answer the phone and use Word, anybody can do this job. Well, I think sometimes with the chief of staff role, we have this preconceived notion about what it is and what we should be able to do, and that it is the next step beyond, executive assistant. Maybe in some organizations it is, but not in all. And so I think you really have to do your homework and make sure you're very clear about who you are, the skills you have, the strengths that you bring to the table, and how that fits in, because it's certainly much more people oriented and project oriented. And if those two things aren't your strong suit, no matter how much experience you have and no matter what your degrees are going to be, you're going to probably have more of a difficult time being successful in that role long term.
Couldn't agree more.
And
the other,
sorry, you go now.
The other thing that we have a very clear distinction about, I just want to come back to what you were saying, is I don't know if it resonates in the UK and the US, but we always talk about you're either an S or an M, so a specialist or a manager. So if you're a specialist, you do not want to manage people. And if you're an M, you're a manager, you are managing people. And I think we all were taught or conditioned to want to be a manager. I don't want to be a manager. I'm a specialist. So I know that role would not be appealing to me. And I often think that it's being chased as almost a status symbol, if you get what I'm saying. It's not really that it's the job, it's almost just the tag, so I think people also need to not buy into the hype. If you're a specialist, rather than forget about the tag and the bling around it. I just wanted to put that out there as well, because some of the stuff that I'm seeing on social media kind of gives me that feeling. It's almost, everyone has FOMO because they're not a chief of staff.
And it's crazy. This is what I'm dealing with in the UK at the moment. I've got so many people that are suddenly very unhappy with their assistant careers, and they think that by becoming a chief of staff, this is going to fix everything. And I'm like, but it's a completely different role. Now, I agree with what you were saying, Julie. Lots of admins and assistants can go into those chief of staff roles. I could name 50 PAs from the UK now who I know will make that transition and will do it to, excellent levels. But the reality is that if you're unhappy as an assistant, that's more down to the environment you're in. You're not happy with your salary. That's the big thing in the UK at the moment. You're not happy with your job content and you want more, I'm sorry to any vegetarians out there, but meat to the bone, as we say here. You want more grit and you want to get stuck in. And I got that with my EA roles. I definitely got that. But it's going back to what Julie was saying about planning, etc. But it's something I thought you both might find quite interesting, because this is going to be very controversial in the UK and will probably cost Eva a few members and me some followers, but I actually don't care. I'm really excited. I am running a panel, and this hasn't been, obviously I've run a lot of panels at my conferences over the last 20 years. This panel has never been done in the UK before, because every time somebody has tried to broach this on a stage here, they get shouted down going, no, don't tell us to leave the profession. It's not a stepping stone. I've been one of those speakers, so I hold my hands up. But I'm also very, very aware, and this was before COVID kicked in, that things were really starting to change. And some research came out in the UK, which I believe was done in conjunction with the US actually, and some universities and business schools, and one of our bodies over here, the CIPD, they were talking a lot before COVID about how the younger generations are going to go through these 4 completely different professions. So I might be an admin, then I might be a zoologist, I might become a farmer, and I might end up being a lifeguard on a beach. I mean, they're just saying they're going to be really, really random, because people are not going to come out of college and work their way up a traditional pathway and stay in the same profession for the rest of their working life. And I was starting to kind of, I shouldn't really say that now, because I would never say the EA assistant roles are a stepping stone onto better things, but they can be a stepping stone onto something. And it ties in very nicely with what Julie was saying earlier. So I put this panel together, and I've got 4 individuals. They're all ex-assistants and have gone on to other things. None of them are chief of staffs, I might add. One of them is like the head of membership for a big well-known institute here. She's got a huge, massive remit. She's actually one of our ex-board members. She started her career in the teaching industry before she became an assistant, actually. So there's a whole big story to her. Another one, she had her career as an assistant. She's now the CEO of a PA organisation, but she's a bit of an entrepreneur because she's got lots of micro companies. And then one of my board members she was a chief of staff and an assistant before that, but now she has joined one of the big firms in the city as an operational resilience executive, so looking at risk and things like that. Yeah, and then we've got somebody who's in one of our PLC firms. She was EA to the CEO and now she's an associate partner. And I've asked them to get up on stage and talk about, look, we're not telling you all to leave the assistant profession, but how I now know I have to position this in the UK is that I totally accept you're not going to do what some of us have done. You're not going to stay here for 30, 40 years. And this is where you could potentially take this career and strategize with what Julie was saying earlier to the plan. And it's controversial because I'll get people having a go at me about doing this panel.
Well, and what I would say is, I think it is a fantastic place to start. I think it's a fantastic place to stay. But I also believe that we need to, on my website right now, at the time of our recording, that's April, and we call it Admin Appreciation Month at All Things Admin. We started that about 8 or 9 years ago, and it's kind of caught on. And I've always said that I think the motto for a profession should be start here, go anywhere. And a couple of years ago, I added another phrase to that. Start here, go anywhere, you decide. And the reason I felt like that was so important is because no one wants to feel trapped in the first job that they land after college anymore. And so that mindset and that culture has kind of shifted from what our parents did, and even to some degree, what our experience has been. But I think we can still look at this role as being a very rewarding and a fantastic training ground for whatever you do want to pursue next. And so I think part of it's going to be positioning this as that starting point instead of you absolutely have to choose this as your career of choice or don't choose it at all. Like, that's not a winning strategy.
No. Not anymore.
I've heard a lot of leaders, in our field talk disparagingly about those who don't want to engage with this role as their career of choice. And it breaks my heart, but I'm like, it doesn't need to be the career of choice for every admin on the planet. And if you want it to be, fantastic, but if you don't want it to be, that's also fantastic. You get to decide. So I feel like where we're missing out here is employers need to think more innovatively about how they're using administrative professionals. So that's one point. But also administrative professionals need to think more innovatively about how they can evolve their roles within their companies if they want to stay there doing what they're currently doing. But if they don't, the whole concept around my first book, The Innovative Admin, is this start here, go anywhere, you decide. As you're evolving and growing and changing, you get to choose that path next where you want to be. And it may be more of this, it may be something else or more specialized. So be it. If you're open to the evolution that's about to come, you're going to encounter some of those choices and decisions along the way. And it's a healthy thing for all of us to be considering and thinking about.
Julie, just to tie back to what you were saying, I think it again comes back to if you are reactive, people tend to now wait for somebody to evolve their role, to give them something. If you go looking for that work, if you make it your business, if you volunteer, if you put your hand up, that changes the conversation. You know, if you show people what you're capable of and that you are keen. And I mean, I can honestly look at my own career and say, every exciting thing that happened was because I put up my hand and I said, I'm really interested in this. Please, can I be involved? Even if I just take the minutes in this meeting, please, can I just be there? You know, I was a super user on one of the top HR products for our talent management, only because I'm super nosy. I kind of went to the first meeting and then got very involved. So I think sometimes it's a mindset also of, you know, if you're just sitting there waiting, you are just going to stay in the same place. And I love the fact that you say, you need to look around, you need to explore, you need to kind of make yourself known as willing, you know, as talented. If people don't know, you will not get those opportunities. You mentioned something else that was very interesting. You know, we now touched on the younger people and how to encourage them into the profession. I wanted to find out, you know, we've got a lot of, you know, our boomer generation who are now getting to retirement age. How do we, I mean, position this now as something that is an attractive field to go into? I know from my own point of view, I very much say to them, this is such a good grounding for getting that basic business acumen. You're getting management training for free. You are in rooms that other employees at other levels don't have access to. If you're paying attention, this could be a massive stepping stone. So that's how I'm positioning it with our students from a SIPO. And when I talk to somebody younger who's considering the profession, how are you approaching this from a US context?
Well, I go back to, like I was talking about earlier, strengths and personality type, like helping people first get very clear about who they are and what they enjoy. And if they don't know, then giving them some opportunities to, okay, so here's a path and a profession that can help you explore some of these things. So if you know that you're really good at the technology side. So a few years ago, I had an intern, college intern, work for me during the summer. She took everything I had for our procedures, templates, toolkits, all the stuff, and put it into OneNote for me. And prior to that, like I knew that was when OneNote was still not really that much of a used or known part of the Office suite. And I was like, I know we need to get our stuff over there, but I just didn't have the time and energy to sit down and get it done. I mean, she did it in like a day. And I was so stunned. And I was like, so as business owners, as managers, as executives, like getting more curious about the interests and the skills that somebody is coming into the role with, not expecting them to have everything we need on day one, but getting really curious about what fires them up, what gets them excited, what do they know how to do that I don't know how to do or that I don't want to figure out, and let them help you solve those problems, because they're going to love it. And it's immediately going to get them into your business and into your industry in a more compelling way, and a way that then starts to kind of fuel that fire of, okay, well, what else can I do, or where else are there opportunities? But a lot of I think one of the challenges isn't with the millennials, it's with the managers who are hiring them. They are so stuck in, this is how we've always done it, or, well, that's not how we work here, and so we've got to be open to and willing to think differently about the roles and how we do these things, and be open to that input and that feedback, but have it be give and take. Like they need to be open to our feedback. We need to be open to their input and their ideas as well. And there's a blog post I have on our website called The Principle of Input and Support. And this is where I start with all it's like, you've got to know when it's appropriate to give your input, and you've got to know when a decision has been made and now it's time to support it. And as long as it's not illegal or wrong, like, so I think, some of the onboarding experiences that people have are terrible as well. So making it more of an open, collaborative conversation from the word go can really go a long ways in helping the hiring manager or executive and the entry level or the starting administrative professional figure out and kind of navigate that in a more productive way.
There's so much, I don't know about SA in the US, but in the UK, there's a ridiculous amount of negativity towards my generation of millennials and the Gen Z, which they call the TikTok generation, You know, apparently we don't have resilience, we're snowflakes, we want mummy to do everything for us. Never mind, I didn't have a mother figure, so I did it all myself anyway. But and I'm a veteran millennial because I was born 83, so that's right at the start of the millennial generation, so I kind of get the generation before me as well. I've got a leg in all sorts of places, but yeah, there is a lot of negativity towards the younger generations here. But something interesting which and now I wasn't sure if I told you, but last summer I ran a series of focus groups with assistants up and down the UK virtually. And it was how I used to do kind of a lot of quantitative research for Hayes and really get to what people were thinking. And all of these groups had different generations in them, different backgrounds. Some had wanted to become PAs, others had come in from different professions. And some of the Gen Zs and millennials said to me, why don't we have a say on anything in this industry? Like, we're not on conference platforms, we're
not represented.
There's not hardly any millennial trainers, we're not on the boards of some of these PA networks and institutes and associations, we're not featured in magazines. And I was sitting there going, yeah, I'm a millennial, I have noticed it, but there just has been this kind of anti-rhetoric here towards millennials and Gen Z. And so that's kind of been a bit of a piece I've been working on through EPA, because I am a millennial CEO. So if I can't lead the way, then I'm not sure how many people can.
You'll have to return your t-shirt to the Elder Council of Millennials.
Yeah, I'm a snowflake.com. But yeah, it's interesting. I know we're coming to the end now and running out of time. I wanted to ask you, well, we wanted to ask you around learning and development. And I know you've got lots of tools and resources and allthingsadmin.com, and we will link that in the show notes as well. A lot of assistants are frankly pickled, as we would say here, mentally over when training do I do. There's a lot of FOMO, so they see all these masses of e-shots that come out, they go to this conference, do this event, this training. I mean, it's literally saturation central, especially in the UK. I can't obviously comment on America and SA, but it's led to a point now where assistants are literally signing up for everything, doing nothing, because it's just complete overwhelm. How do you get that strategy and plan in place? How do you clear through all the noise, as I call it?
Well, back to the strategic career plan again, like, what are you trying to accomplish and what are the skills you need, and making your choices about how you invest time and money based on, does this directly contribute to one of my goals or objectives and where I'm trying to get to next? Because I run into the same issue as an entrepreneur. Bright, shiny objects, and now Facebook feeds me sponsored ads all day long based on one search I do, and I'm like, oh, look at this, oh, look at this. And so you can end up signing up for 5 free things, and you don't go to any of them. It doesn't do you any good, and then your inbox just gets cluttered up with all this chaos. So I'm a big fan of, first of all, know what learning style works best for you, but I need a combination. So for me, it's a combination of reading books or reading blogs. Like, I don't necessarily, I know video is a big thing now, and that's a big, tool that you'll see a lot of people doing, but I would still rather go read something in print that I can digest and go back and reread it 2 or 3 times if I need to, than have to watch a video 6 times to get the information. So know what works best for you. But for me, reading is a big thing. Education and training, there's formal and informal versions of all of those things. So knowing what works best for you, but you got to clear the noise, and it's going to be hard to do unless you're really, you set some healthy boundaries with yourself on the tech side, because it's going to keep coming in. But pick, for this year, let's just say your plan for this year is you want to prepare for where the next level of your role is, or you want to get specific training in a certain area. Okay, so pick the 2 or 3 resources that you think are going to be the best for helping you do that, or ask within your network. Okay, this is specifically what I'm targeting. Who would you recommend? And then do what you can to consume as much as you can from those resources. And if it's helpful, great. And if it isn't, then get off their lists, get off of their subscriptions, and get onto one that is helpful. And so I think you're going to figure that out a little bit just by trial and error, but also by asking within your network what has been really especially helpful for you, and then target just those 2 or 3 for the year. And then next year, when you redo your plan for the next 12 months or at the 6-month mark, you can reevaluate. Like you can change it whenever you want. You don't have to wait till the year. That's the other thing. My career plan tool now is every quarter it gives you like a regroup. And so I love that. I can completely change my goals entirely if I want to every quarter. And I think it's important for us to do that more frequently now, especially with the trends and the things that are happening in the financial markets and with the profession as a whole.
Love
And
that.
you know what I loved about what you were saying, Julie, is that if you know what the next thing is, I think if you know what the next goal, the next target is, that kind of training is very much around, the skills that I have that I can boost to get to the next level. I find it quite sad that people only spend training money on their deficits. The other thing that I picked up from you was also be very specific. The more general, you're not going to then find that value in the more general. So really get specific, drill down. If there's, I think that is the big thing that we need to be more conservative with finances, with time, with mental resource. So that focused approach, I think, would be much more effective for a lot of people. The one thing I wanted to just add was, if you are spending all this time training, you also need to embed knowledge. So yes, do the training, but actually embed the knowledge, because otherwise it's just, yourself. You go to a training workshop, you have this wonderful session with a trainer, you get back to the office, the emails come streaming in, you chuck the manual in the bottom of the drawer. So we haven't embedded any of the learning, we haven't changed any behavior, we haven't, implemented. So I think that's also a portion that people are missing.
Definitely. No, thank you. And obviously we're coming to the end of the interview now. We've taken a lot of your time, but this is going to be a fascinating one, I know, to our listeners. So we always like to kind of finish off asking two things. Any, like, kind of looking back over life, is there anything you wish you'd done differently? And then the second part, who's kind of been a big inspiration to you through your career journey?
Well, one thing, I've said it multiple times, but I'll say it one more time. I wish I could have or should have realized that I needed a career plan guiding me long before 2005. When I look back at that, and I'm like, how many wasted years? Like I was just floundering about, like I needed direction and I didn't even know it. So that's one. I'm like, you can't change it, but that's why I'm such an advocate of it for administrative professionals now, because I know what a game changer it was for me. And excuse me. I also wish that I had understood what burnout was and how awful it is to recover from, because I would have put better guardrails in place much sooner. And that's my one big caution. I think COVID really helped all of us realize the importance of paying attention to self-care and mental health and all of the things. Like you can't just keep burning the candle at both ends and expect to stay whole. And recovery is such a non-linear process and is not fast. And quite honestly, I'm not sure you ever fully get over it. You kind of have that nugget of it still hanging on there that can be reactivated if you aren't careful. So I think just being more aware of those things more sooner than I would be two things I would do differently. But as far as advice or people I listen to, let me find my quote here. There's a quote from Oprah that I found it in the waiting room of a doctor's office years ago, and I have reincarnated this thing in more versions around my office and in my social media posts over the years than any other quote. And it says this: I find I have little tolerance now for pettiness and superficial pursuits. There's a wealth that has nothing to do with dollars that comes from the perspective and wisdom of paying attention to your life. It has everything to teach you. And what I know for sure is that the joy of learning well is the greatest reward. So we can get hung up on professions and careers and money and all these things, but ultimately it's about our individual development and what we're learning and how we're growing and how we're evolving. And if that means doing more of what we're doing today, even better than we used to do it, fantastic. If that means stepping into other roles or getting more specific, fantastic. Truly, you can start here and go anywhere. But like I said earlier, the choice is yours and yours alone. And that's where the real power lies.
Love that. Really love that. That is just a great way to end today's interview. And again, thank you so much, Julie, because I know you are like this kind of vessel for the entire industry. I'm sure when you started up, you probably thought, it's about the USA, but you are an international figure. Your books are read all over the world. Assistants from all over the world are literally tapping into the vault that is allthingsadmin.com. So for you to have given us an hour to share some really great and amazing things is, well, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, you. I've
Julie.
enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Assistant Lab. If you enjoyed this content, you know what you need to do. Feel free to share it and help us grow our subscriber base.
Join us again next time. And until then, keep experimenting, innovating, and improving your skill sets.